Well, good evening, everybody. Here we are again at a completely different time. If someone could just pipe up on the chat and let me know that they can hear me okay. It's a little bit hard to know at this end. I'm speaking into a bit of a void, really. So tonight, we're going to be talking about Lightroom. That's the title of the course. And this is not, by any stretch of the imagination, a deep dive into all the how Lightroom works on a fundamental level. That's really a lot of information to share in an hour. I also am working on a full Lightroom course, which will cover all of that and more news about that in a week or so. But for tonight, at this rather different time of 7 o'clock in the evening, I want to share with you some of the oddities, some of the tricks, some of the little quirks that you may not know about, because I'm hoping that everybody listening to me now, and right now there's 151 people actually tuned in already, which is a really good turnout, have some knowledge of Lightroom, even just a little bit, even if you've just installed it and turned it on and gone, oh my God, I've no idea what I'm looking at here. It's your best friend and your worst friend. It can be astonishingly useful, and it is, but it can also be quite difficult to get to grips with in the first instance. So rather than me go and start at the beginning and do importing and all that, I'm just going to show you some of the setup options and some of the ways that I work in Lightroom, and also a couple of things which will possibly save your bacon one day when it comes to backup and archiving. And I'm going to start with that actually. Well, now I've got your attention. Okay. But Adobe chooses some quite strange defaults when they install the software. And one of the sort of the classic whoopsies, if you can call it that, is where your Lightroom catalog gets backed up to if you choose the backup option when you shut it down. By default, the Lightroom catalog itself, now remember, the Lightroom catalog and the images exist completely separately to one another. Okay? They are always kept separate. This is important. So your catalog is a single file. Okay, that's your catalog database is one single file which can be backed up and copied to somewhere else. So you've got a backup copy in case of disaster. The images can be backed up, and that's a whole different story. And it's two different operations. The important thing to remember is that your Lightroom catalog contains quite a lot of useful information, which you will spend quite a lot of time accumulating, adding metadata and star ratings and collections and just generally using it. It'd be really nice if you could have a backup copy of that. Now, of course, I'm going to swap screens here. So this is a second monitor. So I'm going to share that, hopefully, so you can see my desktop. Now, I can't see what you can see, so I'm hoping everybody can see my desktop there. And I've made my mouse particularly large so that you can see what I'm pointing at. Now, in the top menu bar, oops, classic, catalog settings, I'm hoping again that there's enough resolution in the webinar that you can read what it says on the screen. We did a little test before I started, and the first way I had it set up, it was pretty dismal. We've done it a different way now and it seemed to be okay. So if you look in catalog settings, you'll see, and this is the default. This is a clean install of Lightroom. I've done very specially for you guys with only a few pictures in it, so I can show you it in its sort of raw form. If you go into this setting here, you've got catalog settings and general, and you'll see the location of the actual Lightroom catalog file is in users iMac 21, that's my 21-inch iMac, pictures, which is of course that classic Apple default folder where all your images often end up by mistake, and then a folder called Lightroom. Well, that's great. Backup catalog every time Lightroom exits. Now, by default, I think it's that one. It doesn't really matter. The one to choose is every time Lightroom exits. Okay, that's the fifth one down from the top in that list. Now, what this does, and this is the only place you can choose this in Lightroom. I can't choose where the backup goes to in this dialog box. And if you think about it, it's kind of important that you choose where the backup of this file goes to. So let me just close that, and I'm going to shut down Lightroom, and you'll see what's on my desktop if I do this, which is a bit weird. Do you want to quit? Yes. Now it should, see, it's triggered the backup catalog routine, And it says here, every time Lightroom exits, which is what I wanted, but look at this, and this is the key thing here. Backup folder, users, iMac 21, pictures, Lightroom, backups. Now, when I do this live in front of a classroom, I usually say, can anybody spot the obvious flaw with this? And most people pick this up very, very quickly. The backup folder is in the same folder as the Lightroom catalog itself. Now, I'm going to leave that with you for a second because this is really not a good way to do things. And you cannot change this except at this one point in the process, which is when you exit a Lightroom catalog. Here, you've got a choose button. And you need to choose a much more sensible place for it to go. I don't really mind where you put it, but don't put it in the same folder as the actual original Lightroom catalog itself. So I have this, where do I put this normally? I think it simply goes onto one of my external hard drives that's plugged into my computer. Couldn't exactly tell you because what I'm working with now in my studio is not directly connected to my main system, but just make an intelligent choice as to where that catalog goes to. And then when you choose that, let's just put it in documents for a sec, it will do a backup and then it will close itself down. There we go. Click the backup button. Whilst I'm here, a couple of other things to point out. This is a little bit boring, but it's extremely important. And I really, really want everybody to follow this advice, not instructions, but advice. These two options here are worth just mentioning. If you have a really big Lightroom catalog, and my catalog now is around about 360,000 images, it is possible for Lightroom to just get a few of its little connections mixed up so that it loses track of some images occasionally. This is just database management. And if you turn these on, it will sometimes make things a little bit quicker after it's run its little routines. It's basically a bit of internal housekeeping. I don't exactly know what it does, but that doesn't really matter. Problem is, it takes a long time to do. So if you've got a really big catalog, what I suggest you do is turn these off most of the time. And then every now and again, maybe once a month or something, turn them back on again, click the backup button, and then go away and have your dinner, because it can take quite a long time to actually to do its whatever it's going to do. Now I've lost my Lightroom thing. Here it is. Come back again. That's great. Okay. So just bear in mind that that could save your bacon one day if you are doing a backup and you find that it's backed up to the same location as the original file. You really, really don't want to do that. All right. I hope everybody has got all that. The next thing, which is, again, another quirk of Lightroom, is this question that I get asked all the time. And I'm going to go back into my catalog settings, metadata. So hopefully everybody can access that. And now remember, these are all recorded, these webinars. So if I go a little quickly and the mouse is whizzing about a little bit too quickly, I strongly recommend that you go back to watch this again. It's on our YouTube channel. I will put the link up at the end. It's basically Leica Camera Australia on YouTube. It's easy enough to find, but this will be there. So you can go through, and if you missed a little bit, you can remind yourself what I was talking about. Okay. Catalog settings, metadata. There's an option here, the third one down, which says automatically write changes into XMP. Now, what does that even mean? What it means is that if I'm just going to come out of this for a second. Here's a photograph from a recent trip to Antarctica. And if I look at the metadata in this image, you'll find that it's got things like copyrighted, Nick Rains 2020, Melchior Islands, Antarctica, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Now, that information has been added later. Okay, it's not something that happens automatically. You have to go in and do your metadata, adding in locations and captions and all that sort of stuff. That information is stored within the actual Lightroom catalog itself only, which is why it was really important that we talked about backups earlier on, okay, because you don't want to lose this information. So this information as it stands now is not actually in the original raw file. So if you took that original raw file and opened it in a different application, you would not see any of this metadata because that's not how the whole process works. Remember, the Lightroom catalog and the images are separate entities. Images are not inside Lightroom. What you're looking at on the screen behind this here is a preview of that raw file. Okay, so you've got to be careful that you remember that all the metadata you add later is separate. However, there is this option here to automatically write changes into XMP. Now, the XMP word probably puts you off. What this does is it copies this metadata here and your development settings back to the original raw file one at a time. So it kind of distributes each individual image's metadata back to the original image itself. If that original raw file is a DNG file, and my Leica cameras shoot DNG files, so it's a no-brainer for me, that metadata will be stored within that single file. Okay, that's one of the great things about DNG files. If your file or your camera is shooting a proprietary kind of raw file, like a CRW, an ARW, an NEF, or something like that, Lightroom will create a little tiny text file, and it will put this information in that text file with the same file name, but the extension is XMP. And that stands for extensible markup something. I don't know what the P stands for, but it's a text file. You can open it, you can read it, you can even edit it if you wanted to. And that gets copied to the same folder that the original image is in. So now you've got 1,000 images in a folder and 1,000 little XMP files, each of which contains the information for its little partner file. Now you may go, well, what on earth is he on about here? Why is that important? Thing is, if you do this and then you lose your Lightroom catalog, let's say you didn't do the backup that I suggested earlier and your computer just melts into a big pile of plastic and it's gone completely. You could then buy a new computer, install Lightroom again, and just import every single photograph on your other hard drives, and it will pick up all of that metadata and it will reassemble mostly your entire catalog, which is a pretty cool thing. So if you're shooting DNG files and shooting Leica cameras, this becomes almost a no-brainer. It's a really, really good thing to have that information copied back into the XMP. You can turn it on. Now, like all of these things with Lightroom, there's good and bad aspects to this, because what happens now is if I change something over here, if I type in a caption or something, if I type in a caption, it will immediately copy that data back to the original file or write it to the XMP file in that folder. And it happens in real time. As you do it and as you hit the enter key, it will copy it back. Now, the text that we're talking about is microscopic. I think XMP files are somewhere around 8 kilobytes. So it really, your computer won't even notice it. Where the problem lies, and this is something that you may have actually seen yourselves if you've been editing and you found that it starts to chug. And that's because, let me just come out of here for a sec and go into the develop module. Let's pick a different picture. Doesn't really matter which one it is. Let's pick a pretty one here. If I'm using a brush, let's do this brush here. There we go. Hopefully you can see that okay. Looks a bit weird on my screen. Looks all pixelated. That's because I think I've got a super enlarged cursor so that you can see it on the screen. And no matter. As I make an adjustment into this picture, let's just make something really crazy like this, just to make the point. That movement is also written back to the XMP because it can be described as metadata, but it's really complicated. And the mathematics that describe that curve that I just drew is quite data intensive. And as you keep doing more and more things, the computer's frantically trying to write that metadata back to the original file, and it can't keep up. And you can find a situation where your computer starts to lag behind. And it's not the only reason why that can happen, but it's actually one of the more subtle reasons why your camera can actually stop responding very quickly. So going back to the option, catalog settings, I turn it off. Okay, but what I do occasionally, if I go back to my grid view here, is you also have an option. I'm just going to move my keyboard around so I can is to, for instance, select all of the images, and you have an option at the top here under metadata. If you can see that, save metadata to files, or a simple Command S. I'm talking Mac speak here. Apologies to PC people. I think that's the control key on a PC, but it's Command S, and you'll see the shortcuts spelt out in the menus with the correct symbol next to it, regardless of which platform you're on. But that does the same thing, but it does it when you want it to happen. So, for instance, you could, at the end of an editing session, finish just before you close down Lightroom by clicking that option and have it send that metadata back to the original file. So that is a good thing. Now, my wife, Janelle, does all of my metadata editing. I'm very, very lucky in that regard. She doesn't tend to do much of the post-processing. That's kind of my job. So I actually have that option, right, metadata to XMP turned off, but she has it turned on. And that means that as she's typing lots and lots of information into these files, she can't be caught out by a computer crash or anything like that, because it's constantly being written back to the original data, original files, which is a really good way of working. So hopefully you can see that there's two equivalent ways of working there. They both have their pros and cons, and it's up to you to work out which you'd like to do. Okay, I'm just going to come back to me for a sec, because you're probably sick of looking at me. Looking at the screen. So here I am again, because I always want to answer a couple of questions whilst we're going. Back again. Pascal Kirk emailed me yesterday, I believe, or today, just recently. And she wants to know, there are two Lightroom questions. The first one's not quite a Lightroom question, but I'll certainly answer it anyway, is monitors, because I'm using a Wacom Cintiq. I've got a pen I could use. If I was any good at using these things, I'd be working on that, but I'm using it as a second monitor. This is an iMac here, but in my other room, I've got an ASO, a 27-inch ASO monitor. So the best monitors for editing are the most expensive ones, obviously. That's always the case in photography, isn't it? But what's adequate? I have found that anything over about $700 or $800 is going to be fine. Cheap, like really cheap ones, are going to have some weird color issues that may need to be ironed out by using a profiling tool or something. This is a 5K iMac with the standard iMac screen, the Retina screen. It's more than adequate for the task. I wouldn't say it was good. It has some idiosyncrasies, but it's fine. Okay. If you want to go higher than that, then I go with the ASO monitors. There's two ranges. There's the expensive range and there's the slightly cheaper range. You should be able to get yourself a decent ASO monitor for around about $1,000. The reason it's important, the reason I wanted to answer this question, is because if you're looking at your screen and you're making some development adjustments, you need to be sure that what you do to the picture will be reflected on some output device somewhere else. Like when you export it for the web and it's seen on somebody else's computer, which is a tricky one. When you go to print, which is subject of our next question. And also when you, just for your own aesthetic pleasure, really, is it too warm? Is it too cool? Whatever. So you need your screen to be some sort of reference device. And out of the box, most screens aren't. The iPads, iMacs, and good quality monitors generally are fairly close out of the box, but they always require a little bit of profiling. But that's heading down another rabbit hole. So hopefully that answered the question. I didn't mean to go into so much detail there. So on the second part of the question, and this is definitely a Lightroom question, it's to do with exporting. The best settings for exporting for printing large format. Little bit tricky to answer this question because it depends on whether you're printing directly from Lightroom to a printer that's connected to your computer. Like if you've got a nice big wide format printer or even a normal desktop printer, you can print directly from Lightroom. If I just come back to my screen here, there we are. You've got the print module, which gives you all sorts of options of sizing and color management and layout and so on. This is really, really good. Don't think of this as being anything other than pretty much top notch. It's exactly the same setup, just presented in a different way to what you get in Photoshop. And it has some benefits of actually having a sharpening routine built in here, which is way more sophisticated than you might imagine. So printing directly from Lightroom to a printer is an excellent option. Come out of that again. The other option, and this is again a question I get asked a lot in my other Lightroom courses, is what if you're sending an image to a printing place, a bureau or a lab that has its own printers. I better come back to my share screen so I can show you. There we go, share that. In the print, we don't need the print dialog box here. What we need is the develop module, and this is the picture that would be selected at the moment. It's file, export, and you have some options here. I would suggest that you export it depending on the specifications that the lab has given you, and that's really important. If they tell you to do it in a certain way, then you need to look at that list of specifications and you'll find similar things in this export dialog box, okay? Like, for instance, color space and image format. But not knowing any of those things, I would generally go with a JPEG of very high quality, and I would use the sRGB color space. And this is, I know some people, and some of you listening will get this joke. A certain person who will be known to some of the people listening calls this satanic RGB. Personally, I call it safe RGB, because when you use this particular color space, and without going into too much technical detail, it's a really, really safe way to work, and you can't go too far wrong. You will get consistent, repeatable results out of it. When you progress to more sophisticated color management and you know what you're doing, you may choose to use some of these other options here. So if you were sending it to an unknown destination, for instance, a good example would be if you were sending it to, or taking some pictures down to the local chemist where they've got those little booths to print out 6x4 prints. That works fantastically when you put a JPEG sRGB into them, and the prints come out beautiful. They come out looking exactly like you expect. But if you were taking it to a really high-end lab, I would bring them up and say, okay, what's best specifications? The other thing is, don't resize. Send the entire picture. And then you've got all the data that's available, and they can resize it themselves in their own software. So sRGB, high quality JPEG, not resized. And also, depending on the lab, I would go with low sharpening. You don't want to over sharpen at this point because sharpening is a bit subtle. So low sharpening, don't resize, JPEG and sRGB would be my advice. So Pascal, hopefully that answers your question. Now, I've got a few more questions here before I press on. I've got 3 or 4. Now, I should have mentioned, let me just pop back so I can see, you can see, I should have mentioned the questions that you asked me, could you try and make them kind of bite-sized, because there are certain things that are really hard to explain in less than a few hours because they are very contextual. I also don't know what you've got set up yourself or what your needs are. So some of the questions that I'm getting already, I'm going to have to skip because they are just really too open-ended. That's possibly the subject for a one-on-one consultation at some point in the future. We can drill right down into it, share screens, the whole thing. And it also probably something in my Lightroom course that will be answered as well. So that first, let me see. Yeah, the first one, Richard Burma wants to know, I have my catalog on an external QNAP server. I want to change the path rather. Yeah, that's tricky. I honestly can't answer that one for you. That's a difficult one. You're going to have to drill down into the QNAP settings. I had that same problem with my first QNAP thing box, and it was less than obvious how you fix it, but I'm sorry, I can't actually answer that in any sort of meaningful way at the moment. Okay, when you write metadata DNG files, I found that during the import process, Lightroom treats files that I've imported previously as new photographs, presumably because the files on my hard disk would change physically. Is there a way to avoid that? No. Lightroom, when you import pictures, is very clever. And it's somehow, I'm not exactly sure how it does it, it knows which images have already been imported. It will even remember the file name of that original, that raw file, even if you change the file name. You can actually see that in the metadata list, which is really quite useful for troubleshooting later on. When you edit when you write metadata to a DNG file, as I just described, it it makes that file show a new creator date because it's been modified, and that will trigger Lightroom to seeing it as a new file. Okay, I've never had the problem because generally speaking, my workflow is such that the images end up where they're going to be anyway, and I don't ever have to go back to do a re-import. But it's a good point, and that's quite a subtle one, so thanks for that, David. But I don't think there's a real problem to that. You just got to anticipate it, and there is an option in the import dialog box to let me see if it shows as new. Yeah, it'd be very hard to pass that one out, wouldn't it? Sorry, I can't give you a specific answer to that one. Ken Wang would like to know, what are my thoughts on Spider monitor calibration? Very good. Go buy one. They're fantastic. All of the tools that are available are good. There's the Gretag Macbeth one, the I1 or whatever it is. There's the Spider, but don't buy the basic models. Okay, whatever you do, don't buy the sort of the entry level one, because they're all about presets. They don't have any choice of color temperature. It's just like daylight, or it's like 3,500 or 5,000 or something like that. They don't have much range to choose on. So go for the slightly higher level ones. Shouldn't cost more than $200 or $300. But the Spider Pros are great. Susan, Nick, given that one sharpens during processing, should one still add the sharpening for print? Okay, this is a very good question, and I'll answer this one, then I'll get back to my notes so I can make sure I don't miss any of my little tips and tricks. Two sorts of sharpening, okay? The sharpening that you do in Lightroom, and I'm just going to swap back to my screen so you can see what I'm talking about. There we are, get rid of that. This sharpening here in detail, this is not the same as the sharpening output, or the output sharpening routines when you make a print or when you export the picture. This is designed to be a way to remove the effect of what's called an anti-alias filter. And this is becoming less and less important as cameras get higher and higher resolution, because back in the day, when you had 6-10 megapixel cameras, the manufacturers found that diagonal lines and curves look quite jaggy. They're basically steps, because you can't really fit a diagonal line neatly onto a square array of pixels. Because if you think about a sensor, it's a rigid rectangle of pixels. If you've got a diagonal line across them, it's going to be quite jagged. So they deliberately blurred the picture. It's true. They deliberately blurred the picture to smooth out those curves and diagonals, and it's called an anti-alias filter. The idea is that this particular form of sharpening here can be used to put back the sharpness of the original capture. You may remember maybe, I don't know, a decade or so ago, Canon and Nikon were regarded as, the Canon cameras were regarded as being less sharp than the Nikons. The only thing was that the Nikons had a less strong anti-alias filter. So the Canon cameras needed more of this sharpening here adding, and then you could get them both back to the same place. Okay. Leica cameras don't have anti-alias filters on them, certainly from the CL upwards, and they're also much higher resolution. So this has become much, much less important. So just to cut a long story short, a very small amount here, or a very small radius, something like that, and I go through all of these settings in my course in great detail, but for right now, 40, 50, 60, something like that of amount, minimal radius, you should find that that will crispen up the picture just enough. And when you then go to print or export, that is actually, that sharpening setting is scaled internally to match the size of the output. So if you're making a 20 by 30 print, it would sharpen it differently to if you were making a 6 by 4 print. But it's only when you've committed to an output size that that sharpening can be calculated. So it's called capture sharpening and print sharpening, two very different things. All right, I'm going to press on. I'll come back to some questions later on. A few tweaks on the interface, which I thought you might find useful. So just going back to my grid view. First one, you may recognize that this does not look like your Lightroom. If you decide that you want to change what's at the top here and put your name in it, you can actually access the identity plate here, identity plate setup, and that allows you to change it from Adobe ID to personalized, and you can type stuff in here and change the typeface, and you can change the size and everything here. I've just done that because when I'm showing Lightroom on a screen, it's nice for people to know who's talking to them. I'd rather have my name up there than Adobe. Up to you. There's even a way of putting little graphics down here, but I'm going to keep that one as a bit of a secret for another time. And it's totally useless. It has no bearing on functionality at all. It's just a bit of fun. Here's another one that you will find very useful. You may have found that if you're working on an image, let's go to develop, and you're on a laptop, and I am on a smallish screen at the moment, you know how you can close all of these panels, and what have we got? There's 9 of them here. If you have them all open, can you see what's happening? I'm getting to this point where all of these palettes, I have to scroll up and down. So if I want to go to my HSL palette, I've got to scroll down. Anything that involves using your mouse slows you down, or anything that involves you moving your mouse very far slows you down. And grabbing and sliding sliders is a real slow process. Lightroom has this thing called solo mode on your panels. And if you right click or option click, or what would it be on a PC? Anyway, the right mouse button, not on the word, but on the bar here, and it works on the other side too. You can turn on what's called solo mode. I hope you can see that. And what solo mode is that as I open one, it closes the other one. Can you see? Basic is, I'm going to open basic, tone curve closes, basic opens. Go back to tone curve. So it's only showing one at a time. If you're working in limited real estate on your screen, this is unbelievably useful. And I just have it turned on by default all the time. You can also do it over here. Same thing, solo mode, so that you can only have one of these things open at a time. It's really, really useful if you are working on a small screen. Okay, so that's neat. Same time, in the same menu, right clicking, if you have, oh, just a sec, I just made, that was wrong. Collapse all, go back to solo mode, show all. Customize develop panel. This changed in the last couple of releases of Lightroom. You used to have a list of things that you could change here, but now I've got this list, and that means that I can turn off panels that I don't use. For instance, I almost never use the tone curve for reasons which I'll explain another time. And I very rarely use lens corrections, and I very rarely use calibration. I can always get them back if I need them. And when I save that, you'll see that they've disappeared here. So I'm just saving real estate. So you can customize that. You can customize up here too. You may see if there's a few things missing here compared to your Lightroom. If I right click up here, I can turn on and off slideshow, book, web, and so on. Like web is utterly useless. It's just so behind the times. You get HTML pages. I mean, really, it's no use at all. Slideshow is not very good at all. It's very slow and hard to configure. Book is actually very useful, but I use it very rarely. When you do a book in Lightroom, the results are superb. Highly recommended, but I'll turn that off. Map I use quite a bit. So I've actually left up here the things I use most commonly. So that's just a nice little way to work. All right, hide panel. So also you can hide the panels at the side. I'm hitting the Shift and the Tab key at the same time. So if you suddenly want to look at all your thumbnails, you can hide the panels or you can bring them back again. Shift Tab at the same time does that. That's really, really useful. The other thing that I do like to do is to use the F key. If I hit the F key now, I get a single image, full screen with no distractions, and the F key back again. I find that I use that a lot when I'm editing, because I'll make some adjustments. I'll have a look at the picture, and it's amongst all these other pictures and other colors, and I think, oh, let's just have a quick look at that one, and I'll just check it for just overall effect. And it's just brilliant. It pops it up full screen on your monitor, and on the nice big iMac monitors, it looks absolutely superb. So that's the F key. Another bit of advice is I would strongly recommend that you learn a very, very few, at least, shortcut keys. For instance, D for develop and G for grid. These are really, really useful. So I can swap between the two. And Z, or the Z key if you're American, that actually toggles between whatever your magnifications was set to before and the fit screen. So that's very useful. Back to G. Going back into the develop module, the Z key will toggle between whichever two of these you're using. So if I go to 1-to-1, okay, and then I'm just clicking here and click fit, I'll do that and that. The Z key will do exactly the same thing. You see it's gone fit and then 1-to-1. But if I go 3-to-1 and then hit the Z key, it goes 3-to-1 and fit. So it toggles between whichever two of these settings you're using at the time. The reason these aren't going very big is that you may have noticed these are JPEGs. I've just put these into this catalog for speed purposes because this computer is only connected to my catalog through wireless, and that is a very non-recommended way of working. What you really want is a proper hard wireless, a proper wired network, preferably the 10 GBE variety, but that's a bit more expensive. So I've just done this for demonstration purposes. Okay, I'll go back to a few questions here. Come back to me for a second. Hello again. Sharpening. Tony, hi Tony. Do you use Lightroom on the iPad, and if so, why? Oh, I was hoping no one's going to ask me that question. The answer is no, mostly because I take my laptop with me everywhere. And I don't think I've ever been in a situation where I have not had access to a Lightroom, but a laptop, but I have had access to an iPad. The idea is that one could travel light and just take the iPad and so on. Lightroom for iPad has come a long way in the last 12 months. I have actually been involved a little bit in behind the scenes stuff with Adobe, doing some beta testing for it. They put out a few new tools and they get feedback, and then they either remove them or they make them better, whatever. And it's come along hugely. The question that Apple and Adobe put to me was quite simple, was can you use this to replace a laptop? And as of today, 10th of June, my answer is still no, not entirely. Okay. Now that's not because of the processing. The processing and the everything is great. There's so many tools in the iOS version of Lightroom. It's so similar to the main version, the classic version, which we're looking at here. My problem is with the cataloging and backup. It's because it still requires a very good internet connection to get your images off the iPad storage onto your Office desktop storage. There, as of now, there's still no direct way to connect the two and actually copy images off it directly. You have to export them, and it's too clumsy. So if it wasn't for the storage management side of things, I may possibly use the laptop. I'm also a mouse guy. I'm not really good with fingers, so that's another thing about it. But as a piece of software, it's superb. It's just that that's really focusing on the post-processing rather than the image management, which to me is actually at least as important, if not more so. John Shingleton, if I have a time machine backup running on an external hard drive, do I need to back up the Lightroom catalog as well? That's a very good question. In principle, no, because Time Machine on a Mac is backing up the entire system as well. So it can quite literally replace your entire machine. And I have done this. I've had a laptop die. I've gone and got another one. I have plugged in the Time Machine, and there's an option when you fire up a new laptop. Do you want to restore from a Time Machine backup? Yes. Sit back, an hour later, my laptop was exactly as I left it. It's awesome. So the answer to your question is no, you don't really need to. Thing is, I'm a little bit paranoid. Those of you who know me will have heard me say this before. And I would actually really like to have a bit of control over this. So I actually don't use Time Machine for my backups. I have other systems, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's just a bit closed, like a lot of Apple stuff. You know, it's the right way, the wrong way, and the Apple way. When it works, it works great. But when it doesn't, it's very hard to troubleshoot. So you're doing the right thing. And as long as you've got some sort of backup going, you're good. Ken Wang wanted to know, what export settings do you use for large print versus screen? I kind of answered that one before a little bit, but just one thing I would say was, Ken, is that when you're exporting for screen, there is a sharpen for screen option. use that. And also the other thing is there's an option to type in a resolution 300, and it's often 72. It's irrelevant for screen. So if you're exporting an image to go on a website, it's the pixel dimensions only that determine how big it looks on the screen. It's only when you're going to physical output that the resolution becomes important. So for screen output, sharpen for screen and choose a pixel dimension that works for you, like 1000 or 1200, and you'll be good. Suzanne, hi Suzanne. Why not go straight to Photoshop? Just asking. That's a tricky one to answer quickly because there's lots of good reasons. I'll just show you what one can do. If you are in Lightroom, and I'll just better share my screen so you can see what I'm looking at here. Share screen, desktop, there we go, share. Okay, when you are in Lightroom, and you can go to Photo, Edit in other application. I don't think I've got Photoshop installed on here, but you can see grayed out here the option for edit in Photoshop, or you can hit Command E. What this does is it exports a TIFF file, so not a JPEG, so a non-compressed file, and opens Photoshop and shows you the picture in Photoshop, so you can do whatever Photoshoppy things you want to do. And then when you hit save, that image goes back to the same folder that the image was originally came from, with the same file name, .tiff, not .dng, and it's imported into the catalog. It's called round tripping, and it's absolutely superb. To answer the question, Lightroom can do at least 90%, 95% maybe, of the things that I need to do to my images. I'm not a heavy post processor. If I spend more than a minute on an image, I'm working hard on it. I shoot lots of images for stories, documentary work, and I find that I simply don't have the time to go through Photoshop for every single image. Photoshop is kind of the scalpel for the really fine work. Now, I have colleagues who only use Photoshop for this stuff. Christian Fletcher, for instance, uses, in fact, he's coming around to Lightroom a bit, but he's a Photoshop guru, as we all know, and he would work much more comfortably in Photoshop. But thing is, he's doing those spectacular images to be printed and hung on the wall of his gallery one at a time. He might spend a day on a picture, 2 days, 3 days, I don't know. That's when Photoshop comes into play. But when you're doing collections of pictures for editors or for books or whatever, Lightroom gives me almost all the tools I could possibly need. And when I don't have those tools working as well as they could be, I can flick over to Photoshop and have my cake and eat it, basically. So hopefully that answers your question there. Ashley, hi. Can I possibly use my Lightroom on my laptop and then use that catalog on my iMac by importing that catalog there? Well, then my wife has her catalog on the iMac. I would rather edit on the larger screen. You can do, well, show you. We're showing the screen, aren't we? Yeah. You have this thing called import from another catalog. Hopefully you can see that. So if you connect your laptop to the network, if you've got a network, I'm sure you will have, then you can use this option for the Lightroom catalog that's on your desktop computer, so your master catalog, and you could import everything from that other catalog so they kind of merge together. There's a few little quirks around how you might do that. I think we may have talked about this before in the deep distant past, last time I saw you. And it is something I'll be going into in my Lightroom course down the track, but it is absolutely possible to do that. But one thing I should say, and I'm just going to wag my finger, is if you're working with more than one user on the same catalog, Lightroom is absolutely not designed for that. It's a single seat application. It's well, as many catalogs as you like, although I recommend one, always recommend one. Single operator catalog is local. So you can't have a catalog. The catalog file itself can't be across a network. The images can be, but the catalog itself needs to be local to your computer, i.e. in the computer or in a USB hard drive or something. What you can't do easily, it's not impossible, but it's not easy, is have two people working on the same sets of images. That is a recipe for disaster unless you're super disciplined. So, but to answer your question, yes, you can import other catalogs. Okay, I'm going to go back to some of my little sequence of tips and tricks here, and I'll answer some more questions in a few minutes. Okay, we've done layout, we've done shift tab, shortcut keys. Oh, here we go. And this is a really good one. You'll like this. Share screen. I've lost my share screen thing. Where's it gone? There it is. I've got too many screens open at the moment. All right, back to the share screen. And back to thumbnail view, which is, as you now know, the G key. I've got to activate the window. There we go. You may see a different thumbnail layout on your version of Lightroom. And if I just enlarge those thumbnails, hopefully you can see that I don't have a big gray number here. And I've got quite a bit of useful information sitting at the top of my thumbnail. If you right click underneath the image down here, there's also another way through the main menu at the top, but I find this the easiest. At the bottom of this menu, view options. There's your view options, okay? You may have your cells by default set to compact cells. If that looks familiar, then that's what's been going on. Now, this number here is of absolutely no use whatsoever because it's just 1 to a billion, depending on how many pictures you've got. You don't search with that number or anything. I have no idea what it's even doing there. If somebody can tell me if that number is useful, I'd love to know. What you want to do is change to expanded cells, and then this allows you down at the bottom of the dialog box here to use the expanded cell extras. If you watch my screen, you'll see them disappear. Turn them on, and there's 4 positions you can choose. 1, 2, 3, 4, and whatever metadata you've got in your image, you can actually put in that location. So I've chosen file base name, which is the file name without the extension, and I've chosen to put the file extension on the other side. It's just the way I've chosen to do it. Remember, there's no rights and wrongs with this stuff. There's just slightly easier or slightly more difficult. I'm trying to show you ways of making your life a lot easier by doing this stuff. I find cropped dimensions extremely useful because when you've worked on an image in the develop module, you may have cropped it. I crop my images sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But when an image is leveled, for instance, it necessarily gets cropped. Or sometimes I've been too far away from a subject and I've cropped it to get a bit more of a full frame, so the subject fills the frame, whatever. It's very difficult to know whether the image you're looking at as a thumbnail is in fact of sufficient resolution to be printed at a certain size, for instance. You'd have to open it and then have a look at it and see. Now, it's not at all obvious anywhere in Lightroom unless you go looking for that information. You'd see it only in the develop module if you go to the crop tool, and then you'll see the crop inside your main image. It doesn't report this information. Well, it does it here, but it's not turned on by default. So now I can see that, well, these are JPEGs, but this original image would have been 8,368 pixels wide because it was shot on the Leica SL2. It's now 2,048. So I know that that image is not an image I would want to use for a large print. And when you've got a whole bunch of full res images and then a few images that are cropped, you will be able to read that very quickly and see, oh, that's actually either a cropped image or it's not the original full resolution image. So that's really useful. Same here. This is kind of giving you the same information in a slightly different way. But again, feel free to change them to whatever you find useful. That's just the way I've got it set up. You can change it as you wish. I would also turn on color labels. It's off here. And then you see that little tiny gray box there. If that had a color label, there, it will show up. Oops, I did it to all of them, my bad. Remember, your best friend is Command Z. It's because I had all the images selected. If I choose that and go red, it's a nice little sort of button. Also, can you see this little red outline around the image? That is because in my view options, I have, where is it? I've got to find it now. Tint grid cells with label colors to 20%. That is, you'll see it change slightly when I OK that. That's really useful. So you've got this hint of the colors. Very useful there. So this is great. Rotation buttons, yeah, turn them on if you want to. They only show up when you mouse over anyway. Look, You see as I mouse over, they appear in the bottom right-hand corners. If you've got sometimes the cameras, sometimes phones don't pick up the vertical and the horizontal nature of your picture well, so it's nice to have those there. So that compact, expanded view of your thumbnails is really useful. Oh, same dialog box. This is good too. You'll like this. So go into the your develop module or single image view, and you'll probably see, I just hid it, I'm cheating, you will see nothing up here. If you hit the I key, just the letter I next to the O and the U, you can cycle through certain information about your picture. One, that's the second one, and the third one is blank. So it's 1, 2, so I'm seeing the shutter speed, the ISO, the lens I used, then I've got the pixel dimensions and the date and everything. You can change this too. So if you go into your view options, come back to here, go to view options here, in loop view. See, we were in grid view before. Now we go to loop view, and that's loop. Show info overlay 1 and 2. And these are the things that you can have showing at the top of the screen. So you can have all sorts of different stuff there. It's not quite as extensive. I'll tell a lie, it's just as extensive as it is in the thumbnail view. So you can customize this. And if you suddenly need to see how big the picture is in pixels, it's really easy just to hit that and you can see the pixels. So those are the two ways you can see the crop dimensions. Other than that, it's very hard to see them. So that's kind of cool too. Okay, go back to some questions for a second. Back again. It was Ashley Ita Uliati. I hope I said that right. For printing purposes, should we export the file in TIFF? That's a tricky one because it kind of depends. Ideally, a TIFF is the right format to use, ideally, but it's going to be a really big file. In my experience, I've found that a high quality JPEG that is not further adjusted or scaled or anything, so it's the right pixel dimensions and everything, is impossible to tell from a TIFF file. The TIFF file is it's a working format. It's uncompressed, excuse me. It's uncompressed, and it's all of the data that you could possibly need. It can even be 16-bit and everything, which is great. But once you've got to that point of printing, you only really need 8 bits of data, and someone's going to pick me up on this and say, no, 16 bits better. Let's put that aside for the moment because we could have a discussion about that. Can you see it? That's my question. It's the right size, and it's a smaller file size. So if you want to email an image or upload a picture to someone's server for printing, it's more versatile. To give you some perspective on that, I have done a lot of books in my career. I did a webinar a few weeks ago about my latest one. I also have submitted images many times to Australian Geographic magazine, Outback magazine. I used to work with Peter Eastway for his magazines, which are very glossy. Every single picture, without exception, that went to those magazines and into those books was a JPEG. So they are more versatile. So a JPEG is a delivery format. A TIFF can be a delivery format, but it's really a working format. So you will not lose anything by using high quality JPEGs, like 90% quality, as long as you don't do anything to them next. They're just reproduced at that size. Okay. Next question, Casey Ng. I hope I said that right. It's been embarrassing. I use a RAID 5 external storage. Good. Do you recommend I back up the RAID 5 storage to another NAS storage, or is RAID 5 pretty safe already? Okay, quick answer to this one is absolutely, and that second one should be stored away from your house. Not going to go too much into the storage side of things and backups because it's quite complicated, but you need 3 copies of your images. There's the ones that are local to your computer. There's a backup of those on another physical box in your room, but then there needs to be a 3rd copy of everything which you take away and you store outside your house or your office. Absolutely, you must do that. And if you have to buy another RAID 5 box, so be it. You don't need the RAID 5 thing for the backups. You only really need it for your main storage. So a RAID 5 box with 4 or 8 hard drives in it, and then 2 similar size single drives or double drives is more than adequate. okay? Because RAID 5 is designed so that you can lose one drive and hot swap it without actually having to stop working. It's great, but it's not necessary to have 3 RAID 5 boxes. That would be very expensive. But I just cannot stress too highly the importance of having an offsite copy. And I can't help myself. I have to share the story of when I copped a ransomware virus late last year. And I don't know where it came from. I have some suspicions, long story. But basically, I watched all the file names on my computer change. And then they were encrypted. And I got an email saying, I'll send you the encryption key if you give me X amount of Bitcoin. Wow, seriously scary. So I just shut everything down. And I went to, actually, I sent my wife to do this. She said, I better go. I said, you need to go to my mother-in-law's house where we keep a 3rd hard drive, which is backed up probably about once a week when we go around for dinner or something. Brought that home. It's air gapped, so it's not plugged in when it's at mother-in-law's, so it cannot be compromised. So clear the computer out, clear everything out, plug it back in again, back where we started from. It totally saved my bacon. 360,000 pictures. I mean, really, it makes the hairs rise under my arms just thinking about it. Suzanne's made a comment. So Lightroom is quicker. Yes. Simple as that. Peter, hi, Nick. Could you please explain reference photo function, how to set the reference photo gallery? No. I actually have never used that function. It's up here somewhere. God, it's very embarrassing when someone, I'm not even going to be able to find it. It's view reference. I don't know. I'm going to have to email you about that. Drop me a line and let me have a look, because I actually don't know the answer to that question. Sorry about that. Moving on. What can Lightroom do that Bridge can't? This is Odette Cavill. What can Lightroom do that Bridge can't? Lightroom is a cataloging application. Bridge is a browser. So Bridge opens, when you go into Bridge, you double click on a folder and it opens a folder. You look at what's inside it. That's great. That's fine. It's a browser. Lightroom builds a database of all of your images, regardless of whether they're even on your computer or even offline. Okay. The cataloging side of things in Lightroom is orders of magnitude better than anything that Bridge can do, because it's a database. But when it comes to actually post-processing the images, they're identical, because when you go to open an image in Bridge, you go to Photoshop, and Photoshop has what's called, at the very least, a Adobe Camera Raw filter, which accesses all of the controls that you've got in Lightroom. Literally, I think 99.9% the same. There's a couple of tiny things different, but they're virtually the same. But you're still within Photoshop. So they are, Lightroom and Photoshop Bridge, so consider Photoshop and Bridge as one thing in Lightroom, are identical when it comes to post-processing. Obviously, you've got Photoshop's layers, which takes it in a different direction. But when it comes to cataloging, browsers are only very, very limited in what they can do. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question. That's a bit of a gnarly one, that one. Can you change the file name directly on Lightroom? Yes, absolutely. That's no problem at all. You can actually batch change them. So you can go File, Edit. Oh, yes, sorry. Share screen would be a good idea. Heard a little voice. Click. There we go. All right. So we've got I'll go back to my G for my grid, and library, rename photo. Okay. And you can actually batch this. So you can even rename photographs using the metadata in the photograph and create a whole sequence of new file names. It's a little bit tricky to explain in a short period of time, but that facility is absolutely there. I actually rename all of my images. And if you look carefully here, you'll see this says Antarctica _ 2003. 2003. Oh no. Different 2020 03 being April, and the 2nd of April. So that is a constructed file name, and then that's a sequence number that goes in order. They're not contiguous here because this is only a small subset, but you can see 1425, 1560. This file name here is constructed from the metadata in the image. So I absolutely do rename all my pictures. Okay. All right, Ita Uliati again. How, if we change the computer, can we use the same Lightroom? Really good question. And it's actually really no problem at all. You simply copy the Lightroom catalog onto an external hard drive in its entirety. That's the catalog file itself, remember. I'll just come out of my share. It's the catalog file that's the important bit. Copy that somewhere else, okay? Buy your new computer, install Lightroom, and then copy that catalog back onto your computer and open it. File open that catalog, and as long as the images are still maintain the links and they're still in the same on the same hard drives that they were, it will rebuild those links. So it's absolutely dead easy to do that. It's very, very versatile. All right, I'm going to go back to how are we doing for time. I'm going to whiz through a few more of these little tips here. Oh yes, I've got to show you these. I would be very remiss if I didn't show you these. So in the develop module, and I've just got to share my screen again. Here we go. In the develop module, there are some user interface quirks, or not so much quirks. Let's call them hidden features that make your life a little bit easier. First thing to do is, by default, that panel is very narrow. And if you are trying to slide these sliders left and right, it's really twitchy. Like I'm using a mouse here. With a pen, it's almost impossible. You can type numbers into the little window, or you see that change to what's called a scrubby slider. You can drag it left and right as well. But I find that incredibly twitchy. If you maximize the panel, you double the width of these sliders, and that makes them half as sensitive. You'll find that a lot easier to work when you're dragging sliders around in Lightroom. The other thing is, if you have adjusted an image, I'm just going to play around, just move these away from center. To reset them, you can drag them to 0, but it's really difficult to do because there's 100 either side of that, minus 100 to plus 100. So getting it back to 0 is really fiddly. What you can do is simply on the pin, double click, bing, back to 0, or double click on the word, back to 0, or double click on the name of the panel, double click. That will save you an awful lot of fiddling around with your mouse. It's really, really useful. Another thing you can do, and I do recommend, and let me just pick a different picture. Let's pick this cute little sea lion here, fur seal rather, and this is probably an underrated feature of Lightroom, the auto button. I'm going to reset this. Oh, it's not going to work on this JPEG, is it? Because it's not a raw file. Nevertheless, if you hit the auto button, sometimes you can get a really good result. And you can see it's made some decisions about how the picture should look. Don't think it's changed a great deal. It's not bad, actually. It's just popped up the contrast a little bit. This auto feature has been completely rejigged in the last 2 or 3 releases of Lightroom, certainly in the last 18 months, not exactly sure, but it was redone completely, and it's a lot better than it was. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with clicking that auto button just to see what happens. Because remember, Lightroom is a metadata-based editing. It's called parametric editing. It means that what you do in this screen here is simply remembered in the Lightroom database. It doesn't actually change anything. It certainly doesn't change the Lightroom file, the raw file back on your other hard drives. It's just a preview that you're changing. It's only when you go to export that these things are brought into effect and change the file. So you can always go backwards. There is infinite history states in Lightroom. And what's more, and this is very cool, and this is something to go back to the previous question that Bridge and Photoshop absolutely 100% cannot do. Everything you ever have done to your file is remembered, even when you close down Lightroom. Now, if you do some work on a Photoshop file and then save and close, that history is gone. In Lightroom, that history remains forever, even if you shut it down. So you can always go back over a file and retrace your steps, or better still, simply reset it. So you can't break it. So have a go with the auto button and see if you like it. There's one thing that I'm hoping nobody's seen this because it's really obscure, and I've actually just got to look up the right keystrokes for this one. But if you, where is it? If you shift double click hold the shift key down, double click on the pin, it autos that one slider. And the really weird thing is that if I reset that and I do the auto global one, you get different results. That's because a lot of these sliders depend on each other. So if you make a picture brighter or darker, you may find that you need less or more contrast to make it look good. So you could actually automatically adjust each of these simply by shift double clicking. That's what I'm doing, holding the shift key down, and I'm double clicking on the pin, and you'll see it went to +7, -25, +9. So that's a pretty obscure little feature. I thought I'd just leave you with that, because I've pretty much got to the end of my sequence of little quirks and hopefully answered quite a lot of questions. Still some questions coming in though. So Suzanne would like to know, Lightroom Classic and Lightroom, is one better than the other? Classic is desktop only, the other is iCloud based. Would using both get complicated? I'm just going to come so I can out of this so I can talk to the camera better. That's a really gnarly one. You may have gathered from earlier comments, I'm not a big fan of cloud-based image management, shall we say. I certainly not something to rely on. As a backup, as in a genuine backup, but not a primary, the cloud has a lot to offer. But the idea of having all of my images stored on the cloud and having to access them through an internet connection is, to me, not really, I feel quite uncomfortable with that. The fact that I have a really bad internet connection in my office doesn't really help, but still. The differences between the two are less than you might imagine, but let me just put it in a nutshell. Lightroom Classic has cataloging facilities. The other one doesn't. The searching and the cataloging and all that stuff in the desktop version is an order of magnitude less well specified than Lightroom Classic. Lightroom Classic is astonishingly powerful when it comes to finding and working with your images. Lightroom Desktop is good up to a point. It'll find file names, it'll find various bits of metadata and so on. But when it comes to sophisticated searches, cross-referencing folders, offline images that aren't actually connected to your computer but are being cataloged, it's a different ball game. So I look at Lightroom Desktop as being a basic, like a light version or an entry-level one, and Lightroom Classic is the enterprise grade, full strength, really powerful bit of software. If you go past Lightroom, you go up to enterprise grade software, custom written, that costs tens of thousands of dollars. So Lightroom is unbelievably good value when it comes to organizing a proper workflow and organizing a proper cataloging system. And on that note, I should mention that we have a online workshop coming up. Got two. Next week is camera basics. For people who've just started, maybe got their first camera and they want to know some of the really basic stuff. But the week after that, same time, Wednesday, I'm going to be going into great detail into the import dialog box in Lightroom Classic. So I can show you and hopefully tease out some of the strategies that will help you build a genuinely scalable and powerful catalog, which will save you an enormous amount of time over the future. Because if you start in the right way and build in a repeatable and consistent manner, the dividends that pays down the track are astonishing. You know, my entire business is based around being able to find pictures quickly. I'd hoped to have my main catalog running on this computer this evening, but I had a couple of little glitches with it before, just to do with the quality of the screen that you're seeing. It just came out a little bit low res, and I don't think you'd be able to see the various text on the screen. And I was running it on my master catalog of 360,000 pictures, and it's like this. It's snappy, it's fast, it's not slow at all. So that's really where the Lightroom Classic and Lightroom Desktop diverge. One's like a light version and it's adequate for post-processing, but not when it comes to cataloging and storage and all, and finding things and organizing your pictures, that's for sure. Okay, couple more. And Dropbox. Is Dropbox a suitable backup resource? Yeah, absolutely. As an offsite storage thing, if you've got enough capacity and enough bandwidth on your internet, absolutely no problem at all with that. It's a good question, and yeah, good idea. Sandra Dan, I recently had to reinstall Lightroom due to a PC upgrade. I forgot to note how many images I had in my original catalog. Is there a way to check that all images on my hard drive have been synced across? Ooh, that's a tricky one, that is. The only way, thinking aloud here really would be to try and make a new catalog and import the entire hard drive. So all the pictures that you have on the entire hard drive, and then you'll know. Then syncing it up to what you've already got would mean how would you do that? That's a tricky one. You know what? I'm going to have to think about that, because that's a tricky one. Actually working out whether you've got the images in twice is quite hard, because you may have the same image in two different folders and you'd end up with two images in Lightroom. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I may have to get back to you on that one. If you want to email me, because I won't remember, and I'll see if I can find out at least a clue about that. Okay. And Jeff Ray, Lightroom version 6, trying to activate the horizontal taskbar below the grid, which tells me how many files I have. Can't seem to do that. It could be something as simple, and I don't have Lightroom 6 here. Obviously, I've used it. It might just be, if I just go back to my share, just see, it might just be the T. It's this one here you want, where it shows how many pictures there are. It might be in the toolbar. Where is it? No, it's not that. Sorry. That's the one above it. And I know what you're referring to. And occasionally, this bit here, this bar here, disappears. So you may have to try hitting the Shift Tab key a few times. It might pop back. I've noticed that as a bit of a quirk, and I've never actually got down to the bottom of exactly how to turn it back on again. So yeah, thanks for that question. Can't give you a definitive answer, I'm afraid. Nick, reversing edits. The previous function goes too far. What's the easiest way of reversing? Again, I'm still sharing. That would be using the history. Just go back in history and just pick the... I'm not sharing the screen. Sorry. There we go. I can't see when I share the screen. It disappears. It's kind of weird. You can get back in history here. So that would be my preference, because then you can go 1 or 2 or 3 steps at a time. That would be my answer to that one. Ray, is Adobe likely to eliminate Lightroom Classic and make us all use the Lightroom Cloud version? I absolutely would be horrified if they did that. I have no inside information about that, but I would be mortified if they did it, unless they did something very clever with the cloud version. That would be, yeah, me again. That would be awful. So don't suggest that, Ray, whatever you do. Let me see. Irina, last question. Okay, then we can let you all go off. Irina, when I updated Lightroom, the old catalog is not working with the new update. Is that normal, or did I screw it up? But no, when you, at certain points in the Lightroom's upgrade path, particularly when they go to full number releases like Lightroom 5, 6, 7, and sometimes in the dot releases between them, they add some new features which have no equivalent in old catalogs. Like if there's a new tool or something, then that tool's metadata won't exist in old catalogs. It has to upgrade the old catalog, and you should get a warning on a request. Is it okay to update the catalog? You will have to do that if you want to use it with a more updated version. So that's actually normal. It needs some new bits building into the database fields and all that complicated stuff. But yeah, that's quite normal. All right, look, thank you, everybody. I hope there was some snippet there that really you meant, I didn't know that. If you knew all of that, I'm very impressed, because there's some fairly obscure things there. I also hope I've given you a little bit of a taste about just how powerful Lightroom as an application can be. A lot of its power is not obvious, and it's only when you start using some of its tools in combinations and in subtle ways, and some of it is quite subtle, that you realize just how astonishingly powerful it is. It punches way above its weight when it comes to price, and it gets bagged by some people. And I've always said that if it's not working well, it's probably because you're doing something wrong. Maybe. Okay, if I don't expect you to like it. It does things in weird ways, and it is quite rigid the way it's laid out, but it definitely works, and it works well enough for me to run my entire business off it. So I did mention this before, but I'll just refer to my notes. The next week we've got basic photography. Week after next we've got Lightroom importing dialog box, so I recommend that one. These are workshops, not webinars. Then there's a webinar the Wednesday after that, which I'm going to do about thinking in black and white. So it'll be looking at black and white. Why does black and white work so well? Maybe showing you some Lightroom techniques about how to convert to black and white, and just a general discussion about black and white images. Because I know people really enjoy black and white, so let's have a discussion about that. And then after that, I'm going to see if I can get another well-known photographer on to have a chat with us. And after that, we'll see how we go. Always open to suggestions, always open to ideas for these sorts of webinars. Don't forget, this will be on our YouTube channel in a day or so, so you can watch again. And if you missed some keystrokes, you'll be able to see them again in slow motion maybe. And also, if you have come to this webinar and you're not already subscribed to our newsletter, that allows us to keep you up to date with what we are doing and what's coming up in the future. So I'm going to sign off for now. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. It's been a pleasure. And I'm just going to finish by sharing another screen with you and talk to you again in a week.